One of the fun things about stories is that you can tell them yourself. In fact, you can create stories out of things that have happened to you and share them with your family. Now, this story is based on something from when I was about 10 years old. And this is about my dog, Scamp. When I first walked into the house after school that day, the first thing my mother said was, "Your dog," and I knew I was in trouble. Because everybody called Scamp by his name unless he'd done something terrible. But what could he do? He was out in the backyard. It wasn't like when he was still in the house, and the reasons why my mother insisted he stay in the backyard after that. But you see, Scamp was a dachshund. A beautiful red dachshund with a little black triangle on his tail, and he was my friend. I got him on my 5th birthday, and, well, you may not know this, but if you train them right, and if you don't feed them too much, dachshunds are really strong and really stubborn. They were bred as hunting animals to dig under the ground and pull things out from under the ground. And that was how Scamp would get in trouble sometimes, digging in the ground or from using the strength that people didn't believe he had. Out in the backyard, we had to keep him on a chain because we couldn't fence the backyard. The backyard dropped off into a canyon, and we had to use a chain designed for German shepherds because he could only break those slowly. He would pull and pull and pull, and eventually the chain would break. He didn't run away, he just didn't want to be on the chain. Well, my mother said, "Your dog caught a bird." Well, you don't think of little, low dachshunds catching birds, but Scamp had an advantage. You see, my mother liked to have things organized. And when she bought redwood patio furniture, she wanted Scamp to have a doghouse that matched. Now, I don't know if you've been to a pet store lately, but in those days, you could not go to a pet store and buy a redwood doghouse. So she made my father build him one. My father was a design engineer, not a carpenter. So my dog ended up with sort of a redwood log cabin with a flat tar paper roof on top. He looked at that, and the first thing he did was jump up onto the roof of these little doghouse and sleep there. And unless the weather was bad, that was where he would sleep. But you see, that meant he was exposed to birds. And in our yard, there was a type of bird called a shrike. Now, a shrike is kind of like a blue jay in black and white, and they don't like anything else except fur and hair. They use that to line their nests and have a soft place to have their baby birds raised. A dog's fur is pretty tightly attached, especially a dachshund. So if they found Scamp asleep and tried to steal his fur, I could just imagine him sleeping on top of his doghouse and a shrike coming down, grabbing his fur, and Scamp grabbing the bird. So why was my mother upset? "Your dog caught a bird and didn't eat it." Oh, well, now I understood. You see, for Scamp to have anything edible and not eat it was a sure sign that the end of the world was approaching. The reason he was an outdoor dog was because of that one day that my mother underestimated his jumping ability, and she was thawing a Cornish game hen. Now, in those days, they wrapped Cornish game hens in plastic, and then outside the plastic in a cardboard box, and she had set it on a high counter in the kitchen to thaw. Well, the counter wasn't high enough. Scamp got up onto the counter and ate the Cornish game hen and the plastic wrapping and the cardboard box. and the lens cap from my telescope, and a small paper American flag. We discovered this because some part of that did not agree with his stomach, and it ended up all over the kitchen floor. Ew! My mother was not happy to clean that up. And she said, "Your dog has to live in the backyard now." Yep, he was in trouble. He was my dog. But I still didn't understand why he didn't eat the bird. So I went out into the backyard and I saw that he was at the very end of his chain where it reached all the way to the edge of the canyon. And he was looking over the edge to where the pathway went down into the canyon, and he was wagging his tail. And at first I didn't see the bird. Well, I walked over carefully to where he was standing, and there, just on the first step down into the canyon, was the bird, lying on its back, pretty clearly dead, only it was moving. Now, I don't know if you've thought about this, but birds, when they're lying on their back and probably dead, don't move along the walkway. And then I saw what was causing it to move. There, grabbing onto the bird, was the biggest king snake I had ever seen coming out of the brush. And I had been taught at a museum that birds, well, they have to be freshly killed for a snake to want to eat them. They eat them themselves if they catch them, but if it was sitting there for very long, it would cool off and it wouldn't be food for the snake. That meant that Scamp had caught a bird and taken it over to the edge of the canyon and put it there in front of a snake so the snake would eat it. Now, I learned something else at the museum, which was about how people got pets. And one of the theories was they gave animals food to get them to come back and hang around. And I thought, my dog has a pet snake? And then I thought to myself, why would my dog want a pet snake? Now, this took a minute of thinking, and I looked at him, and I looked at his chain. Now, he could hunt anything he wanted within the reach of his chain. I had seen him hunt gophers and snails, but he couldn't reach the flower beds because my mother didn't want him digging up the flowers. And I had seen rabbits and squirrels come up into those flower beds out of the canyon, and all he could do with them was bark at them. And I thought, that snake isn't on a chain. And the next rabbit or squirrel that comes up into the garden is going to be in for a big surprise. Well, I watched the snake carry off the bird, and I told Scamp he was a good dog and patted him on the head. He wagged his tail some more and went back over to his house, jumped up on it, and went back to sleep. I went back in the house and decided to go through the house and out the front door before my mother could ask too many questions, but she called out, "Well, is the bird taken care of?" And I said, "Yes, the bird is taken care of, no problem." And I ran out the front door before she could ask any more questions because, you see, I really didn't think it was a good idea to tell my mother that there was a snake guarding her flowers. There's some things that mothers probably shouldn't know. And that was the story of my dog Scamp.